Thinking about self-publishing and don't know where to start? Join the Spa Girls each week for 30 or 40 or 50 minutes of honest advice, tips and resources. I'm Trudy J and I am here with Shah Barrett.
Hello.
Cheryl Phipps.
Hi there.
And Wendy Vella.
Hello.
Hello. And this week we have an exciting guest. We have Alex Newton of K-Lytics. I'm so excited. Yay. Say hi, Alex.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Great to meet you.
So we're going to do a quick bio. Shah's got that. And then we're going to leap right into the questions.
So I'm just going to do a little tiny intro, although I would say that anybody that has been in self-publishing for longer than 5 minutes should already know Alex. But just in case you're brand new, Alex Newton worked as a senior management consultant in the corporate world for 20 years before quitting his career to work at home in Switzerland, and he founded K-Lytics, which is spelt, because this is something that used to catch me out, K-Lytics.com. So I'm going to hand it over to Alex, and thank you very much for joining us here in the spa. Your morning, our evening, which is why if we're all looking slightly darker than normal and a bit, I've got weird pink glow going on here from lights.
I've got a halo. I just want to say I have a halo.
Yeah, and that is
I'm in the dark.
Artificial, and Wendy's in the dark.
I need a miner's helmet.
Does that make the angel and you the devil? I'm just saying.
I would say so, but anyhow, welcome, Alex, and thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thank you so much for having invited me. It's going to be, I hope we're going to have a great talk, and I'm sure we will.
Yes.
Yeah. And,
so,
hey, and just to clear up that one mystery when you said K-Lytics, there's a little story to that because, like 5 years ago, it's 6 by now, I think, when I wanted to get into this big Kindle gold rush, all right, I discovered 2 things. The first thing I discovered is you cannot make money with Kindle, not at all, at least when you try to publish your grandma's recipe books, which was my original thought. So being a data person, I looked into data and I said, well, that is so cool because all the information is actually on the site. You just have to aggregate it in a smart way to finally figure out, I'm not gonna get rich with paleo diet breakfast recipe books. The paleo diet breakfast, really a market niche.
Yeah.
So at that time I looked into Kindle primarily, which I still do. But when we launched our initial site, I was very naive. I was also new to the online business world. I come from the corporate world. So the anecdote is, well, originally the thing was called Kindlelytics, like Kindle and analytics. But on your first day of operation, you don't want to get into a trademark dispute with Amazon. So my lawyer basically said, you don't want to do this. But what do you do? Everything, the graphics, everything was ready. It said Kindlelytics. So basically, we took out the Indle from the Kindle, and that's how K-Lytics was born.
Awesome.
Very cool. That is
so
cool.
Funny. And it's such a well-known name in the industry now. So it just goes to show, whatever you name something, that's it. That's what it becomes. So
it's very cool.
What were you doing when you decided to start K-Lytics? Like, was it just you were trying to help other people, or you were trying to help sell your grandmother's memoirs? Like, what was the idea behind it?
Well, I think the original perspective was frankly not, let's help the world and help the authors. It was at the beginning, it was really helping my family because at the time, I was traveling 24 hours a day, 7 days a week through the corporate world in Europe and the world. And my daughter at the time turned 4 years old, and I had, one of these aha moments. Not that she asked me for a passport, she was too young for that, but I simply spent too little time at home. So after 20 years in the corporate world, you say, well, do I want to do this for the next 20 years? My answer was no. So I looked into various online businesses, and it just happened to be at the high time of this Kindle Gold Rush time. And of course, anyone, what can you do? And first I was actually thinking about publishing, and I started experimenting with this Amazon data. And I remember I was part of a Facebook group of one of these get rich with Kindle, quick with Kindle type of group. It was actually a very good group. It was a very good course. And I soon figured, I'm not sure, but what I'm sure about, and at that time I didn't know how many how much money people could earn with romance and fiction. So I started out a bit in the nonfiction realm. Long story short, I wanted to spend more time at home. I very often click on PayPal buy buttons. So I thought, why couldn't people click on my one? I generated the first report, shared it with authors. They tore it out of my hand. And so I started with categories, and they said, well, do you also have this for the next level, like the subcategories? And I remember it was the first report with 418 or 424 subcategories. And I said, can you dig deeper into the market? That was then back in 2015, and the rest is history.
Wow.
I remember those days, Alex. I remember when it was just a baby site.
Yeah, I remember hearing about it for the first time. So what is it about the reports that authors are able to use? Like, is it all about writing to market, or is it something more that you're, like, what's the benefit of these reports that you're producing?
Well, I mean, we can, have a look at some of them during the course of the conversation. I think your audience is also particularly interested in romance, potentially some other genres.
Yeah.
And it's a very long story to this whole, what data you can have. But first of all, let's clear up a myth on right to market. So basically my mission is you are a writer and you have your creative asset yourself, and you have your time, which is an asset. And at some point you also have your money, which you put into the game for covers, for advertising, you name it. Now, in any business, especially if once you start publishing and sell your own book, you are a publisher, right? A publisher is a business. There is no denying the fact. And if you're an indie publisher, you are in the business. Now, me having worked 20 years in the business world, and I still do, by the way, you wouldn't take major decisions on projects without having some market research, Am I gonna meet a viable market? Yes or no? Yeah. Now, there may still be writers who write for, say, therapeutic reasons, right? Or others who just can afford to write and don't have to worry about the money, but some will have to pay the bills with what they write. And at that point in time is where we come in, where we basically say, look, we cannot write the books for you, but you have a certain passion. You say for romance books, you have a certain knowledge. Say you're particularly familiar with, I just did one report on Navy SEALs, right? So because your son is a Navy SEAL and he shares classified information with you, you get the idea. So you can write very, very authentically. And you have a certain craft skill. Now, these three things you have to bring to the table, but what we then bring to the table is provide you with the information that helps to make better and faster decisions. Shall I write the book in the first place? Is there a market? What would be the earnings expectations if I do into it? When I launch the book, into what category shall I put it for maximum exposure? What is the typical top-selling cover art that I should brief my designer with? What are the typical price points for shifter romance books as opposed to accounting books for maritime lawyers? Price levels are very different. Price levels are very different.
And they change too, don't they? They change. Like I remember getting the urban fantasy ones, and I think it was maybe 2 years apart or a year apart, and the average price had changed between the two reports. That was fascinating to me.
Absolutely. I mean, if you just look, for example, very good news for romance authors. Let me just share this one screen here. So, for example, in romance, what you see here is the average price across the top 100 romance bestsellers monitored over time from here, in this case, November 2018 to right now, or basically a month ago, 2020. So that's an 18 months time frame. And yes, the thing goes up and down, and there's peaks and troughs in this graph. But if you put a trend line through it, you clearly see that the average price has increased actually for a romance average quite dramatically from $3.50 to about $4 a book. And we still know that romance is, I think, next to religion and spirituality, the lowest priced category that you have on Kindle. But you see prices are going up, and as an author, and then as the business person in you as the author, you obviously want to know such type of data.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah, totally true. So do we want to go through the elements of the report first, do you think? Is that helpful, or should we talk some more background kind of?
Well, why don't we just dive into it? I mean, if people are interested in these types of reports, let's just call up one here arbitrarily to get into it. So perhaps by way of background, so what we do here, there's basically two parts to K-Lytics, right? So one part is for, some authors basically are geeks like myself. They love spreadsheets, and you would be surprised how many there are. Very often the former real estate agent or former accountant or former corporate controller who's now writing shifter romance novels, and they want to give me the data on all the 7,000 plus categories, which ones is the highest selling, lowest selling, you name it. So that is a database part, but many other authors may also be more single genre focused, and they're just saying, hey, I'm starting out in romance, or I already want to know, I might go into, say, romantic comedy, and can you give me all the insights there possibly are publicly available on the data on romantic comedy? So this is what we cover, and let me just share the screen here with you, then we can go into it. So one part of what we do is what we call, I hope you can see this here on your screen.
Yes, we can.
So one thing that we have is what we call genre reports. So for example, we just covered here vigilante, justice fictions, or the lead child, Mark Dawson, type of books. Here we just did a pretty steamy romance one, military romance, Navy SEAL romance, clean romance. So you see here sci-fi romance in general, female detective, sci-fi, you name it. Let's dive into one of those that you get a feel. And there's two types of reports. Basically, do you want to start out, say, in romance, and you say, well, I don't know whether I'm going to write whatever Christian romance or military sci-fi romance. I don't know yet. So is there any way of sizing the market a bit and going broad in the information, not necessarily so deep, but let's use category information. And this is what we do in these, what we call the genre overview reports. We just did, for example, one in March. And these are pretty data intensive, because what you do want to know in these reports is, how is the whole market built up? How many categories are there? Then we look into, trends over a longer period of time for romance. What are the sales of the subcategories? How do they trend over time? To then, in essence, boil it down to what is going up and what is going down.
That's wonderful.
Right. So that was what was interesting, and I think it was in the 20 Books conference, you showed a graph that was, I think paranormal romance was going down as a whole, but actually within paranormal romance there were subgenres that were actually going up. So you've kind of got to know the different niche subgenres as well as the kind of wider one, don't you?
Absolutely, because at some point in time you have the trend information, and then the other information, and I think we keep this a little bit later. There are these famous graphs. You call them caterpillar graph. I call them the snowflake graphs, which basically boil down and we can have a look at one a little more down the road. So these plots of dots are basically, every dot is a romance subcategory, right, or below, and it basically shows people which of these have high sales but still are not overcrowded. We'll go into it in more detail. So this is one type of report, but it's pretty data driven. The other type of report is when then people say, okay, we've learned that, say, clean romance was a recent one. That is trending up. And by the way, it has been extreme, I think the only category during the lockdown in romance that has been trending up was clean and wholesome romance. And in these cases, people don't want to have broad information, but they want to dive deep into, well, what can be said about clean romance. So, you might not see here the details, but we talk about, genre definitions. We talk about different cover arts. We talk, which market shares come with certain positionings. How is it here? By the way, there's the long-term trend from clean and wholesome romance. How does it perform versus steamy?
Wow.
I could go on and on and on, but see here, the point is we go deeper in one specific thing.
Yeah.
And then just to conclude, and then I'll stop my monologue here.
No, it's good.
People
if anyone's listening to this on audio, pop over to the YouTube channel, because you'll be able to see exactly what we're all looking at here.
Exactly.
I apologize. Of course, we have listeners too. But here, you want to see what are other top performing authors in the segment. What are publishers if you're looking for a publisher? Even down to, well, what sells? Is it the billionaire? Is it the Regency Lord? Is it the what are tropes that sell well? So exactly, for those who are just listening, I'm basically showing sample exhibits of the market research that we provide in these types of things, all the way down to what's the cover art series and so forth. So to give you a feel, that is basically what we are doing, and the whole essence, not to overwhelm our listeners or people who watch, the whole essence is you should be able to make publishing decisions and writing decisions as fast as you can and as precise on the best information you can have, so that you can focus your money and creative efforts on where, I'd never say guarantee success, there is no such thing, but where are the odds of success the most favorable for you?
Yeah,
because the whole thing is that you're not telling people what they should write, but rather guiding them to have the view of what, because something isn't selling, that maybe it's actually that's not a good enough reason to write it just because you feel like you want to, if your aim is to make money.
Yeah.
Because that's not going to work.
As soon as the monetary objective comes in, you simply cannot ignore, excuse my economic language, you cannot ignore the laws of supply and demand, right?
Yeah, just the way it works, right? And we're all about that. Like, we're business people as authors. We want to make money, like us personally.
But it also is about making that decision of why you're writing, isn't it? Before you
do that first.
Like Alex said before, you've got to do that straight up.
And I honestly have used...
I think you raise an extremely important point.
Yeah.
Sorry, you've gone, Trudy. Go, Alex.
I was just about to say, money can be one objective. For others, it could also be like authority in a certain field, right? I mean, there are so many little categories where you're never going to be able to buy a car from when you publish. But if you can claim, look, I am the #1 bestseller in maritime accounting law, this may help you earn your money elsewhere, if you get the idea.
Yeah. So there's always to do it. I was just going to say that I've bought I made decisions based on, for me, the Urban Fantasy Report, in terms of prices that I put my books up at, and some of the tropes that I've used in new books. I've planned them based on those reports. I find them hugely helpful. So if anyone was considering buying them, I mean, I've only bought the individual ones, like the niche down ones, but I think they're amazing. So go you, Alex.
So I'm just wondering if we could just cover that. How do people actually access these reports, Alex? Do they have to sign their firstborn over to you for the next 10 years, or can they just buy a...
How did you know, Shah? How did you know that my child was now belonging to Alex?
Yeah, so basically there is your first daughter, right? And or what you do in Regency
or $37, whichever one.
Not Regency Romance, Scottish Romance, and these types of things. No, it's very simple. Look, we provide two things. We provide memberships, monthly memberships, which come in basically 2 different tiers. And you can also go to our shop and get the individual reports. Now, we're a business too, and for us, be able to plan and consistently do the research, it's obviously of interest to us. So we basically have a very good offer for the memberships, especially the premium membership, which is as expensive as an individual report. So, and with a membership, you get access to a lot of these reports. So basically, we reward your commitment with my commitment. But I can totally understand, and that is why we have the shop, that some person may say, well, I'm just interested in the this Regency Romance report that covers then historical romance that covers Regency, Victorian, Scottish. Sometimes we do a bonus report in it, like World War II romance. If that is your thing, you're perfectly welcome to just buy an individual report.
And I just wanted to give a reassurance to anybody that is kind of slightly allergic to spreadsheets and that kind of thing and data like that. Alex also, as part of the report, does a video recording overview, and he discusses the report. So you get it, if you learn better by listening or watching him going through it, it just takes away your need to suddenly, you don't have to be a data analyst is what I'm trying to say. You make it accessible. So just
thank you. And that is very important to us. You know, I've worked as a consultant in the corporate world, and we had a insider joke, which always said, if you come up with the result of a data analysis that may solve a complex or shed light on a complex problem, well, you still have the challenge of conveying the message. And in talking to corporate CEOs, we all said, you know, the chart or the exhibit has to be understood by people, by basically children, grandmothers, and corporate CEOs. If the three groups can all do it, then it's okay.
Then you've got it. Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah. Equating authors to children.
That's what keeps the communications department employed, though, you see, and that complete corporate
thing. And I think some of us are all of those things, all just rolled into one.
Hello. Oh, exactly.
So we've looked at the report now. I know that you've got some cool data about just Amazon in general, and I'd really like to just kind of get your data on Amazon as a whole, and then maybe kind of dig a bit deeper into some of the other areas around kind of indie and all that interesting data that you have.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's endless ways of data, but let's just start at the very top, right? So if you publish on Amazon, obviously you can do print, you can do ebooks. Now let's focus on ebooks for a second. Primarily our data is ebook. We also started audio, not so much the print side of things, but say if you went into Kindle, you just have to be aware that it is a platform that has made publishing easy, right? There's virtually no barriers to entry. There is no agents, there is no gatekeepers, and excuse my words, any John, Dick, and Harry can upload whatever content they want to upload within the remits of some very mediocre quality assurance by Amazon and some guidelines. So that is what's happening. The result of that is that to the very present day, about 65,000 to 70,000 books are added to the Kindle platform every month. Now that is not in romance solely, but that is the one thing you have to take away of it. It's a vast ocean of books by now. It's way bigger than the Library of Congress in electronic media. So that is the one thing that happens. So it is a market where you have by now more than 7 million English-speaking titles on the platform, 70,000 added every month. So you can argue it is a platform where still the supply of books is growing faster at potentially the demand of books. Now, ebooks were a big hype during the lockdown, and that greatly helped many, not all, but it did help. But that's the one thing you have to take away from. The second thing from a big helicopter point of view is, well, what type of genres do well on the Kindle platform? And here, the fact of the matter is, the number one genre is romance on Kindle. That may have to do with it. That may have to do with the demographics of the typical Kindle owner or device owner or ebook reader in general. Number one is romance. Number two, usually mystery, thriller, suspense. And then you have number three-ish is then usually contested between sci-fi, non-fiction, sci-fi and fantasy, non-fiction, teen, young, adult. And the only big what do you call it? Anomaly.
Anomaly.
Thank you. Anomaly. My God, difficult.
So you're probably saying it with a funny accent now. So don't trust what we're saying.
Don't trust us.
For those of you who are watching, I'm going to read it out to the listeners. So the helicopter level exhibit or chart that shows the average sales rank across all those 30 top level categories basically looked like this in April 2020. So that's a month ago. And you see there what happened is the first one is this non-telling umbrella category, literature and fiction. But there you go. Romance, mystery, thriller, suspense, and then look what happened. During the lockdown, children's ebooks climbed here into the into the very top. So that's where we, for example, very quickly we did for those who chase trends, we had the children's books reports. So basically what happened, it was already children's ebooks were getting more popular again. And then if we shift to the same, so if we look here, the winners and losers, if you want, during the lockdown, children's ebooks were like the biggest winners, followed by crafts, hobbies, and home, many reference books, medical books, of course. And you see at the very bottom, romance was the biggest loser.
Oh no!
Hey,
what happened?
What happened? Well, people.
No one was feeling romantic.
I think
too busy
people
looking after the kids at home.
Yeah.
Yeah, or all of a sudden the husband is at home, so you no longer need to read romance. I don't know.
Careful now.
You finally have the romance live and in color, or not so much. I don't know.
Where's science fiction and fantasy? Were they just not either?
They're actually not shown here because they held up, you know. But now, what is important about this is, in absolute terms, though, romance was still the top selling one. So while here in a percentage, decline, it shows like, oh, we lost market share. It was basically a drop in the ocean because the jar is still so big. So it was not that serious situation. And then as said, it always varies by the subgenre. So if we, for example, go into, that was an interesting one, teen young adult romance, right? Like the dystopian romance type of things. If we took like a 5-year graph, not even an 18 months, a 5-year graph, which for those who listen, we're basically showing a graphic of the average sales rank in teen young adult dystopian romance and how it deteriorated drastically over a period of 4 years from April 2015 all the way. We had the lowest point end of last year, where basically the average sales rank of that category dropped from 2,000 to like 12,000 on the store. And then you see what happened during the lockdown. And sometimes you have like two effects that work together. And then you have to obviously, and this is what I do in the videos, what is behind the data? So in this case, what happened here was also very interesting is, first of all, during the lockdown, teens started to read again. There is only so much Netflix you can watch potentially. I don't know. But kids and teens started to read. They only could read ebooks because Amazon didn't ship the physical ones. And two effects were happening. The one was, it seemed that people, and that applied in other genres too, went back to what works. Let's read the classics. Let's read the books that I always wanted to read but never came around doing so. So in this case, all the teens went, I always wanted to read Hunger Games, and now I do.
Interesting.
And at the same time, Suzanne Collins, was finally publishing a sequel to her Hunger Games series, right? And all of a sudden you have two effects, and you see the graph, like rise back up within a period of 2-3 months. The whole category is being lifted back up again. So these are a bit the dynamics that were happening.
That's such an interesting thing that you say, because I know that for me during the lockdown, I went back and read all my favorite books. I wasn't willing to read anything new. I wanted to know exactly how it was going to end, and it was total comfort reading. So I don't know if that's anything that anyone else did. It's just what I did, though.
No, you're just weird, Trudy.
Yeah, thanks, Sha.
It was interesting, man. Obviously, and how dynamic the whole thing was. This is now not romance, and by now I think we're now mid-June, and at least here in Switzerland, where it seems like Corona is over, and knock on wood that it stays that way. The interest for it has like dropped back into where it was before. It's as simple as, so I don't want to belabor the point, but just to show how these external events can actually do something in the book market. You all of a sudden had categories that were like in complete oblivion, where obviously you now have categories on Amazon on, you know, medicine, infectious disease, or for example, here's the category on diseases, physical ailments, respiratory illnesses.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Wow.
And they're all going up
amazing.
for our listeners, for people who are listening.
Really are.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which makes sense, right? Like that's...
Well, I can understand the health side of it, but I can't understand wanting to read about apocalypses when we feel like we're in one. That just like blows my mind.
I can understand the fitness and dieting though, like the health and fitness. Yeah, like you said, because we all just wanted to we had nothing to do. So we decided to try to get fit, you know? Yeah. We didn't.
Travel died off.
Travel died,
The travel,
Yeah, so what we're showing here to the listeners is the category travel, Europe, Italy, Florence. And that's, if you saw the graph, it took more than a dive. It went nowhere. So did Corona have an effect? Of course it did, but frankly, to many of the big fiction authors, the one effect it did have was on book formats, right? So that was really a thing, and the big question is it gonna stick, right?
Yeah.
Because we did have we're showing here, for those who listen, a graph, simply the search interest on Google from start of the year, or April, all the way, not quite up to now, but it was basically up until end of April, the search interest for coronavirus, which was like a peak, a real steep peak on the 23rd of March this year. Right. And what happened then, and we overlay this with a graph on the search interest for ebooks, which doubled exactly a week later. Ebook interest went up by 100%. And by the way, kids' book interest went up by 1,000%, you know, within a matter of weeks. Now, the big question, which, and I show, this is an analysis which is already a month old, but at that time we had this big question, well, that rise in ebooks, is it going to be sticky? Is it going to be a very fleeting one-time thing? Or is it going to, while coronavirus interest has plummeted already, is also ebooks dropping back down to where it was? And prediction was, and I think if you go on Google Trends, you will see it yourself, we're sort of between this inert and fleeting thing. Basically, there is a lot of inertia in the book market. That's sometimes really good news, because some trends, because some authors are so worried about chasing ambulances or chasing trends. And sometimes these trends really happen over like 2 years up, 2 years up there, 3 years down. You know, take vampire romance. These are like very long-term trends and paths.
Yeah.
Wow.
Very interesting.
It is. There we go.
Okay, and we're back off the... So
yeah, I was too busy reading that.
I know. We've got to remember to keep talking, people. For the
yeah.
It's very hard. So what about the makeup of the genres on? So if we move away from Corona a little bit and think about... so, for example, I know that romance is ebooks anyway. A large chunk of them are actually indie authors providing that romance out there. What does that mean for us as indie authors? How does that matter? Does it not?
Well, I think, first of all, it is very good news for any indie author, because coming from that supply and demand perspective, you know, if you know that indie authors make a certain percentage in a certain genre, and that is a significant one, you obviously like this. I think it's a statistic I showed at the conference, right, where we basically started out saying, well, overall, of all those categories, that of all those, if we take any 100 book bestseller list, right, and we simply asked the question over a period of 3 years, what are the type of publishers that were able to position themselves at any point in time, at any month in time, in the top 100, we found that 38%, and the biggest share of these top 100 rankings in any category were achieved by indie authors.
Wow.
Only then to be followed by imprints, only then to be followed by big 5 publishers, right?
That's huge. That's not just romance, it's across lots
It
of
is.
categories.
It is across lots of categories. Now, obviously,
Wow.
the story does differ by genre, right? So one can obviously then look into the various bestseller lists and dive deeper down. So here, for example, we have broken it out by individual genres. So not to bore the people who are just listening, but what we're looking at is what is the share of indies versus Amazon imprints versus big 5 publishers versus others in various genres. And the big message is that romance is actually not only the number 1 genre on Kindle, it is also the one genre where indies have achieved the highest share of top 100 rankings, which by the way is 62%, which I find just absolutely staggering, amazing. And you know, anybody who is an indie author or hybrid author for that matter, because these books would also count in there. Big tap on the back. Well done, you guys.
Yeah. That is awesome.
It's interesting to me that mystery, thriller and suspense is still 44%. Well, that's Amazon imprint, isn't it? Is the biggest.
Yeah, I mean, this is basically what's happened there. And I think that's the other thing to note is, as we know, over the years, Amazon basically purchased a whole number of publishing houses, or founded them or changed them. So Montlake, Thomas and Mercer, Lake Union, you name them, some, pretty in their field, So for example, here the number for mystery thriller suspense, 44% of the rankings being Amazon imprint, that is largely achieved by Thomas Mercer, who does a lot of their mystery thriller suspense literature, and a little bit also by Montlake, their romance imprint, which, however, has also which has been doing extremely well, romantic suspense or, Linda Lay, these types of books. I think they're published primarily by Montlake, but many of those are also categorized in mystery thriller suspense.
Yeah. Wow. And just for anybody listening that's into science fiction, that's 55% indie as well. That's another huge percentage.
Right. And same to young adult, 50. Yeah. So I think it's impressive. And,
That's really impressive.
Go the indies, go the indies.
Well,
the indies rock.
Yeah, and particularly romance writing indies, just saying, because we won't get into the psychological reasons for this, but I'm going to say it as fact. And I think a lot of the writers are women, and women are very, very good at networking, and the romance writing community in general was ahead of the curve in terms of indie publishing, and there's the results, I think.
Yeah, maybe.
Absolutely. And just to drive the story home, I don't have the exhibit here with me, but we at that point in time it was for the Vegas conference, we looked at all the over a period of time, the Kindle All-Stars, right? So those ones who rank extremely high, or their book rank extremely high, and they get this special bonus out of the Kindle Select Global Fund as additional royalty bonuses. And every author who achieves that all-star status has on his book page a little note and a link by Amazon that this is an all-star. So you can actually look at these people. And we went through all of them and all their books, and also there the vast majority of the people achieving all-star status were indie romance authors. And that's like all kinds of romance, from whether it is ranging from the reverse harem, you name it, academy romance, to the clean and wholesome Christian romance, whatever. It is a very broad spectrum.
Yeah.
Wow. That's good. I like that. Thank you for telling us that.
No,
We like that.
It's very, very cool. That's exciting news.
And ebooks are more popular, do you think, in romance? Or you don't actually collect print data, though, do you? You're saying so. It's hard for you to compare.
Well, what we were able to do is if you go onto Amazon at any point in time and you go to bestsellers, then they have New York Times bestsellers, You scroll a little bit down, they say print, Kindle, and audio bestseller list. Now, the print bestseller lists we found out are basically a misnomer because they are actually cross format. They're not necessarily print. So let me show you. So and that was pretty exciting news for us at the time when we looked at it the first time, because once you leave the overall bookstore on Amazon and click on the left hand side, then in the bestseller list of the individual categories, we went to print books, right? So there is this one site where if you click on print bestsellers on the Amazon list, it takes you to the book bestseller lists. Once you are there and you click on romance, you get a picture like this. And for those who listen, we have here a picture of the top 100 book bestseller lists in romance. And we figured, well, wait a minute, number 1 is a Kindle edition, number 2 is a Kindle, number 3 is a Kindle edition. How come that in the so-called print bestseller list, you find so many Kindle editions? So we figured it is a cross-format category, which then led us to, back in 2017, for the first time to basically say, out of the given top 100 in romance, what percentage of books is ebook versus print versus audio? And already back in 2017, romance was at the top of the list, where basically around 90%. So every 9 out of 10 of the bestsellers were Kindle editions.
Wow.
That's pretty impressive.
Good news.
And then
Really good news.
And then just to drive the story home, this was then across all categories. We see how print got squeezed, audio was growing, and then during the lockdown, it went like this.
Wow.
Right.
Okay, look at that. Romance 93. That's
93.
pretty impressive.
Oh, here we go.
So 15%, for example, of mystery, thriller, and suspense books were audio, and 35% were of science fiction and fantasy were audio.
That's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
Audio science fiction. That would have to be a really good narrator, I think.
Yeah.
No, but science fiction and fantasy are apparently more popular in audio than, say, for example, romance. I think is the story, isn't it, Alex?
Yeah.
And look, and teens, 21% versus 21% to audio versus 51% in ebook. So yeah,
absolutely. So here the story is. I mean, in talking to, I'm not very close to the romance readers. I'm close to the romance authors. But what the romance authors tell me is, look, if you look at a typical romance reader, she or he is so voracious. The speed of audio does not keep up with the speed they consume the books, unless they put the audio at an incredible speed where they're there was the hero and he gave her it doesn't work, right? No. So that may be the reason.
Those real voracious whale readers would read 1 or 2 books in a day, wouldn't they? Some of them.
And some of those audiobooks are like, what are they, 6 to 9 hours long, I guess, by the time you get them going. Well, that's fascinating. Awesome. So I want to talk now about there was a slide that I recalled from 20 books that I want to talk about, which was kind of the concept of backlist and how managing your backlist, and how there's there's that slide down the rankings for authors, and kind of how
I do remember. Who were the best mountain climbers? I still do have it here. It was I do remember. So basically, for those who listen, was we looked at, and I think the name of the analysis was what goes up must come down, right? So we looked at the top 100 titles across categories, and we said, if a book achieved a top rank, a number 1 ranking, or actually a top 100 ranking, where would it typically rank? 1 month down the road, 6 months down the road, 12 months down the road? And that was because many authors also posed the question, hey, can I make money off the backlist or with older books? So the first conclusion we had here, and here I'm gonna show the analysis. So basically we asked, in any point in time, if you look at any given category or a bestseller list, what percentage of the books, what share of books are books that are less than a month old, up to 12 months old, or more than a year? And at the bottom of the slide, we look at, well, what is the share of books, not the share of money, the number of books. And basically it splits almost like half and half. So in the big categories, you have half of the books are pretty new, that is up to a year old. And actually a quarter of the books are only a month old or even pre-orders. Mm-hmm. About half of the books, in this case here, 55%, are more than a year old. But of those that are new, they tend to rank higher in those top 100 lists. So if we look at the sales ranks and the royalty percentage behind it, we see that the books that are less than a month old reap up about like 40% of the royalties. And then those between 1 and 12 months is so a bit proportional to their thing. And about 40% is of the books more than a year old. So the first question or first answer is, yes, of course you can money with your backlist, and you should. And is the Amazon algorithm favoring fresh books to some extent? In the popularity list, yes, publication date is one of the factors. But you see, it's not black and white. It splits almost like half and half, with a bit, a bit more bias towards the fresher wear on the shelves. And so that's the one thing to notice. And the other thing is, why is the backlist important? It is virtually impossible, unless your book is called Handmaid's Tale or the 7 Habits, and you name it. What we looked here is that the typical top 100 title will, after a month, already be down at 17,000 of the store. After 12 months, 64,000, and then after 3 years, it will basically have dropped down to store rank 100,000, 116,000. Now that is across categories, so there is also smaller categories in there, but it just shows you a bit of a trend line. But the good news is that within all that, the indies are doing an incredibly good job at keeping the books up there. So that rate of decline, I'm showing another graph for those who listen on the podcast, where we show that rate of decline of a book from a top ranking to then 3 years down the road. And basically the indies do a much better job in keeping their backlist up compared to the big five. And one factor in that may be KU. And so that is what we found on that type of analysis.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Fascinating. People in KU tend to have their rankings stay higher for longer. Is that kind of what you would say? Well,
the question is a bit, what is cause and effect in this whole thing? I think the simplicity of all this is, Amazon does not favor or disfavor KU versus non-KU in any like discriminatory way in the algorithms. So I know I'm making a bold statement here, but that's what looking at the data, what I thoroughly believe.
Yeah.
But what does happen is, from a buyer psychology point of view, I think it's very simple. If you have a subscription, right, and you pay for the subscription, anything you then download as part of subscription, from your point of view, it's like a free book, right? Yes, you pay your whatever you pay a month, but if you're then presented with a screen that says here, either on the left-hand side, it's like a real purchase by a trad publisher who says here, a Hatchet book group, buy now with one click, Kindle price $14.99, as opposed to on the right-hand side, you have read for free with Kindle Unlimited, just click to download. It is very obvious that the button on the right, the Kindle button, converts at a much higher rate than anything that has a price attached to it. Now, what people often don't know is both the right-hand side, the Kindle downloads, and a purchase, whether it is 99 cents, $3.99, or $14.99, drive sales rank in exactly the same way, right? So downloads that from a buyer psychology point of view are basically free. This is not the free part of the store, but it's basically KU downloads have the same impact on the sales rank as a proper purchase. And I think just looking at the biopsychology, that is what I believe, that over time, of course, you will have Kindle Unlimited books, and authors or publishers who are heavily in Kindle Unlimited almost automatically gain a higher share in the bestseller list if that is how the algorithm works.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah,
And for those of us that don't, because we can't access Kindle, well, not easily anyway, Kindle Unlimited from here in New Zealand, it's good for those of us outside of the US and the UK to actually try and see some screenshots of how it looks for the store for purchases and those that are reading on Kindle Unlimited. I think it makes it's too easy to assume that how we see it is how our readers see it, and it's often not the case.
Oh, I see. Very interesting point. Yes.
Yeah. We'd have to, like, they have KU in Australia now too, so it's really just us, isn't it?
Of course, it's just us.
It's just us.
We're right down here, stuck in the end of nowhere.
Another couple of countries somewhere.
I don't know where, I can't think of any. So the other thing I wanted to talk about is you talked a little bit about market forces, which was when we were talking about like paranormal romance being the big category that was going down versus some of the smaller categories going up, but also trends and finding trends. So I just wanted to maybe talk about, like, for our listeners, how if you were someone who was trying to decide your next book and where to set it, how to kind of decide whether it was going to be reverse harem or whether they were going to write, I don't know, sharpshifters.
Right. I mean, it's almost going back to what I said at the beginning. I think the starting point should not be the data or the trend. The starting point should be, what is the type of literature that I always get? It's my mantra almost, right to market it can start with the data. Don't get me wrong. I have many people who say, I can write anything. Just tell me where the money is and I'm going to write it, or I'm going to have other people write it if you're a publisher. So of course that works. But as an individual author, I believe you always have to ask the first 3 questions, and then you look at the data. Question 1, what do you love? Can you imagine writing Amish romance the next 15 years, even if it's a temporary trend? Question mark. So what do you love? What do you have? What do you have knowledge about, right? So if I tell you, hey, legal thrillers, great. If you don't know legal proceedings, you shouldn't get even near it. And by the way, the same is true for what people told me who write certain romance tropes, where people say, we can smell a non-genuine harem, whatever writer who's just doing it for the money. Readers can smell this from 100 miles. So question 2 is, where can you write with authenticity? And the third question is then, and certain genres come with certain craft skills, right? Some require you being incredibly good at writing steamy scenes, or others require a certain subject matter knowledge, right? So once those 3 questions are answered, you may have a list of like 20 subgenres where you say, I like that. I could imagine writing this. And this is where the data comes in. And then we look at trend. You can obviously look at my data. It's always valuable. People underestimate the tool. It has also some limitations, but, always look at Google Trends. The data quality depends a bit on the time period, but if you want to have just go on Google Trends and type in vampire or vampire romance or paranormal romance as a search term, and it shows you these wonderful 10-year graphs of waves. And for other genres, the search volume will be too low for Google to show you any meaningful trends. So here we use a bit more like Amazon data and dig deeper. But this is how you do it. And then, stay close to your author friends, like in these podcasts or in the leading Facebook groups. And just type in trends in your beloved Facebook reader group, and you will get post after post where people discuss, hey, I think this is going on. For example, right now, what we see happening is you have paranormal romance, for example, still usually selling, but getting overcrowded. Yeah. So sometimes it's also a bit of a marketing thing where you now look at big hitting authors, you know, the K.F. Breens, the Myers of the world, where all of a sudden they're inventing a new label. What used to be paranormal romance is now, well, let's take, perhaps from the marketing point of view, take out the romance part of it, but we keep the paranormal. Now it's not witch cozy mystery or that type of thing, and all of a sudden you have a new label being born, which is paranormal women's fiction, and it's all the way up there. So these type of things you discover if you stay close to your bestseller list, close to our data, but most importantly, close to your to the big hitting authors in your genre, you know, and you see what they are doing will often define a trend.
That was interesting.
Wow.
I did watch that whole K.F. Breen and Shannon Mayer inventing paranormal women's fiction, which is really interesting. Fiction for older women, yeah, paranormal. It was,
yeah,
and they did it. They all got into all those 13 authors got into the top.
The pre-orders are already, you know, and talking about crowded markets, you know, if we talk about millions of, I mean, I think if you type in billionaire romance, I think you get like 36,000 search results, English-speaking books. Now, paranormal women's fiction, we actually just did an analysis. How many books were published in the last 6 months with that label or put on pre-order? Now, the curve is steeply up, but it's still, it's not even like 200 books. Like, you have a group of big hitting authors who create something, put advertising money behind it. If that catches with their fan base, you know, they're basically there alone for a certain period of time.
Yeah,
wow.
that's so
For a
interesting.
certain period of time.
Yeah.
Until the shirt tails get held onto.
Yeah.
There was a graph that you had up that was talking about reverse harem, and it was showing that there weren't enough books to meet the demand for a long time, and then it gets to a point where there's too many books.
Did I just put on
the slide? Yeah, and it gets to a point where there's too many books and not enough demand, and suddenly that's not as exciting a genre anymore.
We've lost them. Oh no.
No, he's just thinking. He's finding it.
Is he?
I think
I do think. No, I can't hear you now.
No, we've lost Alex.
We've lost Alex.
Oh no.
He has actually gone. He's frozen on us.
Frozen on time.
Well, we'll just have to talk about the slide and K-Lytics, K-Lytics.
Here we go.
Here he is. He's back again.
But can we hear him?
We are.
Oh, there we go.
Now there we are.
Suddenly it showed an interrupted connection. So we were talking about that one trend which I showed at a conference where for a certain period of time books were not keeping up with demand. Now, okay, one grain of salt with the data is the search volume on Google for a term such as reverse harem was not necessarily only driven over the last years, if you go years back, by the classic romance readers as we think about it. The whole trope, the basic trope of reverse harem, well, maybe I'm wrong here factually, but what I observed is the origin of the trope and the origin of the popularity of the trope basically came out of Korea and comics and manga, right? And also some television series or cartoons basically that pushed that trope, and that basically then came into the Western world. So some of that unmet interest, but the fact is there was a certain amount of interest which was certainly unmet. But also here, you know, don't worry, because these things don't happen over time. Even if we looked at that graph, it was like a 2-year build-up, then everybody jumping onto the bandwagon. And now that everybody jumped, the leading authors in that very genre may even be so good that they just command the market, the top end of the market, or they say, all right, it's getting too crowded, I move on.
Okay.
Wow.
So could you give us some inside information on the best tropes or genres
Yeah,
for romance authors in June 2020?
You heard it here.
How are my cozy mistresses?
Should I keep going in my reverse harem, or should I start my motorcycle gang?
Well, I get this question so often, and frankly, first of all, if I had the silver bullet, I would probably not sit here, but work as a publishing house, or be retired by now.
Yeah.
Good answer.
So, but there are certain things that come down. I literally would have to look into the data. So if we, for example, we did a report once on, say, bad boy romance, right? And I may not even recall all the details, but it was at the high time of, okay, there was there was the general alpha, right? There was billionaire was the big thing, obviously, in the wake of 50 Shades of Grey. But then it's very interesting. Then the next level down, well, what follows? Is it the biker? Is it the rock star? Is it the MAA fighter? Now, these things, that is what we look periodically in our data. And I wouldn't even give you the data if I had it at hand. I actually, tell you what, I'm interested. Let's have a look at, what was it at the time. Now, this is not an up-to-date report, but I'm interested myself here. So let me just have a look. Let's share screen.
We've got it here, folks. It's live. It's happening
on
the screen.
It is live. So, so if we go through, say military romance, sci-fi romance. I mean, also there it was interesting to see, well, what type of guy is it in romantic comedy? But there was one.
Look at those different covers. How different the covers are in each of these different genres.
Let me look at.
If you're listening to this on audio, you really have to go and look at the YouTube channel.
Yeah.
So here we go. So this was like the alpha male type of, and this is not current. It is not current. But first of all, the categories that these steamy romance, bad boy romance type of guys used, they were all in the green. Basically the frame of the context of the market was already very favorable, right? But then the next question was, well, what is the leading trope? And there we basically went into, and this is where text mining comes into this. So we basically look at titles and book descriptions to basically say how many of the books have the term bad boy in the title or book description, how many have alpha, how many have billionaire, how many have, and then behind this is a whole list of terms like soldier, special ops, Navy SEAL, Is it a criminal, a thug, mafia, a gangster? So basically at the time, it was where the general term bad boy romance was a big thing, followed by alpha romance, followed by billionaire romance. This is sorted by the sales ranks and the estimated royalties behind those. So this is what we do. So at the time when people ask me, well, yeah, like, motorcycle club, biker romance, cowboy romance, not so much if you're into alpha male romance. So there are, in certain periods of times, things that are more popular than other things. And what is interesting is that in some of these reports, we started doing this now since the report is already like the third one in a row, right? So for example, I think let's take a recent example of, let's take here clean romance, for example, right? So I'm going here. Yeah, so in clean romance, the big question was, and let me make it a little bigger for the viewers. So here, we basically said, not only can we now look at, well, is it contemporary clean romance? Is this clean billionaire romance? Is it clean Regency romance? We basically now figured out that if we do this year, we have also done it last year, you can also then start gauging, and this is stretching the data to probably the most you can interpret it from, where you then start saying, okay, hey, contemporary basically gained big time. Billionaire was the #1 last year. It is #2 this year. So you see some of these things are a bit more stable than others, whilst you get the idea. So this is basically what we now can start doing as we start repeating those reports and updating them year on year. How does the cover art change? If it changes, in some it's like very constant. In others, you know, if you look at sci-fi romance covers now, I think they still look the same like when we did the report back in 2016.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
Wow.
So I think we must be rolling into the end of the interview, but I just want to just really quickly ask you, has a lot changed in the time that you've been doing these, like from 2016? Did I get, no, it was earlier than that. When you first started to now, like, are there big changes, or is it still very much the same? Like, what's the...
Well, I like this question, because the answer is, my first spontaneous answer would be, things haven't changed that much. You know, the book, frankly, the book market, obviously when a certain change comes at a point in time, I mean, mention the switch from KU, 1.0 to 2.0, we go from being paid by basically the book to paid by page reads. I mean, these are drastic changes for the individual involved. The reader doesn't care so much, so you always have to put your focus into, well, when I talk about change, is it something that affects the publisher and the author, or has it change to do with readers' taste and what they read and their consumption? And here I find that what seems so drastic sometimes, so I now say us as a team, us, the publishing side of the thing, some reader things, if I look at, we've been doing the report on cozy mystery now for 5 years in a row, right? I mean, just look at also potentially, well, there is obviously the big hitters in witch cozy mystery, paranormal cozy mystery, and they really created a trend. And then maybe a shorter term of things, although paranormal cozy mystery has now been up there for 3 years, and this year it's still going to be the same. When we did a special report on it at the time, I thought, oh, that's a temporary fad. It's not. It established a new thing. And so what we found is there is a lot of inertia in the book market. The book market reacts pretty slow. Most famous example, vampire romance. It's really where you go, vampires never die. They literally don't. So while you did have 10 years, I think it's 10 years ago, right? Twilight blockbuster, vampire romance. Well, the blockbuster had three sequels, 3 parts to it also. General interest faded. Well, there comes Bella Forrest, and she does her 50 Shades of Vampire, 60 books in the series. And she's been living off it for... God knows, what is it, like 5 years in a row?
Bella, if you're listening, please let us be the first podcast you come back on. She's elusive as a vampire. And I think actually that word inertia is good news for writers, Alex. It's good news for somebody sitting there. If you are still writing your cozy mystery that features a witch, go for it. Like, do it. It's
don't stop because you see the search interest for Google drop by, and not always look at longer term timeframes. Now, of course, we do offer data that looks like month by month and what's happening, and for some tactical decisions that, where to place the categories and that's all important. And yes, some trends do happen fast, especially then when authors almost like a group get together. I mean, you mentioned the example earlier, some big headers say, okay, we now go for, we relabel what we've been doing. And I have to pay justice to these people. They're great authors. And obviously there is also content-wise something new in women's paranormal fiction. No offense taken. Yeah. It's, I read it every night, so I know. Joking.
I was going to laugh, and I thought, I wasn't
maybe
sure
he's serious. Maybe he really does. I read it. So I'm thinking, well, of course he reads it because it's great books, but maybe not.
But, so you may be closer to the content, but I can see that there is a shift in content. There is a shift to the label. The latter may be a bit bigger to the former, but whatever it is, that is what I want to say is some trends happen fast as authors band together and say, okay, this year it's going to be the dragons babies. All right. So, and then you just have to imagine some trends, like in any media, entertainment and media industry, the trends don't fall from the sky very often. I mean, they are made by the media, they are made by the entertainment industries. So if big authors now say, hey, we're going to push this in the advertising, and especially now that 37% of the page you view on Amazon are pay to play, that is sponsored search results, whoever pays will define what the market reads. The second question is then always the next important one. Is the trend sticky, or is it like a temporary fad? And this is, I haven't coined the term, but I liked when, I think it was Craig Martell in 20 Books, when he started talking about, is this like a reader-backed trend or an author-induced trend into the industry? I think both work, but obviously the best that can happen to you is that you jump onto a wagon that is like very sustained by reader preference.
Yeah,
Great.
totally.
That's a great way. Great thing to say.
Awesome way. And I think that might be a fantastic point to end our
indeed,
podcast this evening. Thank you so much. That's action-packed, fun-filled, data-driven episode of the Spark Girls podcast.
And get K-Lytics.
Yeah,
people.
get K-Lytics. And watch this on the
get the 50-year subscription. And
everyone go now.
Send your small child, your youngest daughter over,
now
it'll be all right. Brilliant.
Awesome. And so where's the best place for people to find you, Alex? Like where do we find K-Lytics?
Well, you just go to k-lytics.com. So it's K like in Kindle, hyphen like in hyphen, and lytics like in analytics, and a dot like a dot, and com like com. If you put it all together,
glad you explained all of that.
We'll have this in the show notes, right?
So, we'll have it in the show notes. Exactly.
Awesome.
Awesome.
So that's so awesome, and thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Yes, it was absolutely amazing. I loved every minute of that. It was cool.
Thank you so much, you guys. It was a big pleasure. Thank you. And hey, all the very best with your podcast.
Thank you.
And, who knows, talk to you next time. Perhaps we stick together another time next year, and then we can see, well, which of the,
definitely.
what happened to the women's paranormal fiction. By then we'll be able to tell.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
Excellent. We want you back.
So where can we be found, Shah?
Well, we can be found on YouTube at Spark Girls Podcast. So this is, of all of our podcasts up to date, this is a really good one to go online. And we're all dressed, just to reassure people that everybody here is fully clothed. So
when do we need to be reassured?
You go to.
If anybody's feeling slightly nervous, but we can be found at
Alex is looking slightly nervous.
At least rest from the shirt up.
We're jealous of your summer clothes, Alex.
Yes.
It's spargirlspodcast.com, and we're, like I said, on YouTube and also on Facebook.
Cool. Awesome. Right, thank you. All right. We will be here again next time, but see you all for now.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.